For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner-Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to Rooted for the first time in a very long time. Gosh, it feels good to be back. In order to really make the most of spooky season and honestly ease my way back into podcasting after such a long break, I figured we could spend the month of October diving deep into deadly poisons and spending some time digging into some true crime cases involving them. Before we dig in, a quick disclaimer that I am just a lady who loves plants looking to entertain you. Nothing I say in this podcast should be taken as medical advice. Before you make any changes to your personal diet or care routine, you should check in with your care team and do your own research. And I kind of think this goes without saying, but please do not use any of the things I'll be sharing about poison to harm anyone or anything. Thank you. Now that that's out of the way, we're going to kick things off with a plant you've likely heard of and probably even seen if you live in the coastal Southwest, Castor. Castor, or Ricinus communis, more commonly called the castor bean or castor oil plant, is part of the spurge family or Euphorbiaceae family. Its famous relatives include cassava and poinsettia. As the fifth largest family, there are a ton of differences between relatives in terms of look and flowers, but they do have at least a few things in common, including having alternate leaves. Occasionally some are opposite, but details. Stipules on the leaves, which are usually hairs but can sometimes be spines. And if their leaves are not simple, they're always palmate, which I remember because the leaves will always remind me of that guy from Pan's Labyrinth. If you know, you know. This family is truly fascinating. Dating back nearly 66 million years tends to leave you with a lot of lore in the botany world. But for our purposes today, just know that most of the family is made up of herbaceous plants, with a few trees and shrubs, and even some succulents for good measure. But today, we're focusing on an herbaceous plant that gets super tall, up to 40 feet in certain regions, has dark palmate leaves with 5 to 12 lobes, which you can think of as like little fingers that have light serrations. They are usually a burgundy or copper color, but some varieties do turn a darker green. I won't lie to you. The flowers on this one are kind of freaky. They don't have any petals, so they're just these big spikes covered in male and female inflorescences, with the male parts being yellow or white and honestly kind of lumpy looking, and then the female flowers are usually red and very spiky. Once pollinated, the female flowers honestly do not get much better, as they form this kind of fruit called a caruncle, which I read described quite a few times as a warty appendage that just kind of hangs out there. Listen, I just think maybe the words warty and caruncle shouldn't be used in the same sentence, but I had to read it, so we all have to suffer with the mental image, okay? This is still my podcast, even if I was gone for 6 months. Caruncles are a form of elaiosome, which is basically like a really tasty protein bar attached to a seed that makes ants and other critters want to pick up the seeds and ultimately helps the plant spread out. An important note here is that the ants do not eat the whole seed, but instead just the elaiosome, and then they drag the rest of the seed, fully intact, to their discard pile where it then grows. Castor's native range spans from southeastern Mediterranean basin to parts of India, but it has since spread all over the world due to it being an extremely popular landscaping and medicinal plant. If your algorithm shows you anything about hair growth or natural beauty products, you have no doubt seen people using castor oil on their heads and in their belly buttons. Starting with hair, castor oil is applied to hair to act as a sort of deep conditioner. It absorbs well into the hair follicle, helping to hydrate the hair while also sealing it to give it a healthier looking shine. It can also make hair appear more voluminous due to the hydration, which is why you might think of castor oil as being for hair growth. While we don't have any conclusive evidence that castor oil does actually make hair grow any faster, we do know that it can help heal the scalp as an antibacterial and antifungal. And we do have some suggestive evidence that it might help to stimulate blood flow by opening up blood vessels when applied topically, which, in theory, could help to stimulate hair growth by providing more oxygen and nutrients to the scalp. This is all due to rhinolic acid, which is a fatty acid prized for its antibacterial properties, ability to nourish and hydrate, and is also what gives castor oil its laxative benefits. Going back to the belly button of it all, you may have seen some people on TikTok wearing patches of castor oil on their belly buttons, claiming that it helps to aid in digestion. And while it may seem like a new thing, and in reality is not how castor oil truly works, this is actually a centuries old tradition that ties us back to ancient Egyptians and Greeks, who loved the stuff to cure tummy troubles, itchy buttholes, inflamed uteruses, and even scabies. In the case of tummy troubles, castor oil would have been ingested, where rhinolic acid gets to work as a stimulative laxative, telling the muscles in our intestines to contract a little faster and speeding up the pooping process. As far as the other mentioned uses, this would mostly be due to the antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties we mentioned earlier. While people did absolutely love the stuff, I would be remiss if I didn't share the downsides with you. Downside 1. This stuff is smelly. So stinky that ancient Egyptians were literally writing home about it. If I had to describe it, I would say it's very astringent in a sort of nose burny way. It's a lot like neem oil, but with a little extra earthly funk. The next less than fun fact is that a lot of people are very allergic to the plant, and some people are also pretty sensitive to the oil. So if you have sensitive skin and or seasonal allergies, definitely proceed with caution on this one. The last and least fun downside is that castor seeds are actually highly toxic, which I'm sure you gathered by now since it is part of the Deadly Poison series, but the good news here is that the oil itself is not toxic. This is because the oil is derived from crushing the seed pods to dispel it. Ricin, the toxic part, is only water soluble, so it stays behind in the so-called seed meal, which can then be detoxified and used in fertilizer and even livestock feed. This process is still being studied and is deeply fascinating to me, so I'll link it in the show notes for those of you who might want to learn more. If you're wondering why the heck anyone would even bother to try this, just know it's because cows need a lot of food, and castor seeds are a very rich source of plant protein. So this, in theory, would be a great way to get a lot of it for a little less effort, assuming, of course, the toxin is fully removed via the magic of modern chemistry. As far as castor's use in magic, the one thing I could really dig up comes from 11th century England, where according to a super old copy of Old English Herbal, you could use castor to repel rain and hail, but only if you harvested it with pure thoughts. Lusty bitches beware, I guess. Anyway, in order to get the hail to stay away, you would just clutch the seeds or leaves or whatever part of the plant you had handy and say, "Ricin plant, I pray you be present at my singing, and to avert hail and lightning, and all storms in the name of Almighty God who bid you be born. This really does help to highlight the ways that Christianity was spreading while still allowing folks to incorporate more pagan roots into their traditions, which I do think is a really interesting part of not just our history, but also our relationships to plants, and we can still see this a lot today. I could probably do a whole episode on just that, so we'll leave it here for now. Getting back on track, castor has largely spread not just because of its valuable oil, but also for its use in landscaping. This plant has super unique leaves and can grow very well without too much muss and fuss, so it's honestly no shock that people love using it as a way to add interest and contrast to their gardens. I mostly see it used as a sort of filler plant, and oftentimes it's trimmed to be far more shrub-like versus the 7-foot to 40-foot knot tree that it could be. However, this turns out to be kind of a double-edged sword. Since the plant doesn't have a ton of pests and thrives on neglect, it also tends to be a very pervasive weed. I think here in Southern California, I find it far more often on hikes and on the sides of roads than I ever do in highly manicured or heavily designed gardens. And while some of this is just because tastes change, and here we've seen a massive shift to far more tidy looking and modern landscaping plants that tend to be a bit more compact, I think a decent part of this also is because the plant contains one of the most deadly poisons we have, ricin. Said to be 6,000 times as strong as cyanide and more than 12,000 times stronger than rattlesnake venom, just 4 seeds can kill an adult human in a few hours. So I can totally see why this might not be a plant folks are super keen on planting these days. The good news is that ricin, the toxin found in the castor plant, is only released when the beans are crushed. So if someone were to just, say, swallow a whole seed, they would likely be completely fine. For those not so lucky, however, symptoms can appear as early as 2 hours or as many as 36 hours after ingestion. These symptoms can vary greatly and ultimately depend on if ricin was ingested, injected, or inhaled, with injection bringing the most intense and quickly onset symptoms. According to the CDC, if inhaled, a person will experience difficulty breathing, fever, cough, nausea, tightness in the chest, and eventually these symptoms may worsen into heavy sweating, fluid buildup in the lungs, making it even harder to breathe. This would be typically diagnosed by X-ray or stethoscope, followed by light blue skin, low blood pressure, and respiratory failure. If ingested, a person would experience vomiting, diarrhea, which may be bloody, severe dehydration, low blood pressure, seizures, blood in the urine, and eventually liver, spleen, and or kidney failure. If injected, symptoms are typically very similar to inhalation, but will often start with muscle soreness at the injection site. Now that we have a better understanding of symptoms, let's dig into what it's actually doing in our bodies. Ricin is a heterodimeric protein, meaning it's made up of 2 different strands that are bound together. We're going to oversimplify it a bit for our purposes here, since it's a very complex, multi-step process. But basically, once it enters the body, our cells very quickly bind to strand B in ricin, thinking it's just another tasty treat they need to survive. However, once they take in strand B, strand A wraps around them, blocking our cells from making any additional proteins and eventually leading to cell death. Part of what makes ricin so dangerous is the ways in which it's able to so quickly bind and move through our bodies. What makes it dangerous is also what makes it so intriguing, as scientists are now trying to explore how we could potentially leverage ricin's properties in things like cancer treatment by having proteins only target or stick to cancer cells, to help suppress type 1 diabetes, or even to sort of reverse engineer a cure for ricin poisoning. As of right now, though, we do not have a cure or really any way to stop ricin once it enters the body. The CDC advises that those who suspect they have come into contact with ricin should seek medical attention, where they will be given fluids and carefully monitored. But ultimately, there isn't much anyone can do. This is what the Soviet Union really loved about it as a potential weapon back in the late 70s and early 80s. Picture this. It's a gloomy day in London in 1979. You're gearing up for a long day of meetings that could have been emails if only email existed. You're waiting for your bus. You're hungry, you're tired, and thrilled to get home into something cozy. Only 8 more hours to go. As you're dreaming of your cozy PJs and brighter days to come, the man standing next to you yelps, while another strikes him with an umbrella and then quickly runs away. The man recovers relatively quickly. Maybe you both kind of shrug, accepting that this was super weird and random, but you board your bus and you move on with your life. Less than a week later, you find out that man was renowned writer and anti-communist dissident Georgy Markov, and he died. As more details come to the surface, it's revealed that this was likely due to an attack by a KGB agent in retaliation for his work as a very outspoken journalist working for the BBC who left his home country, the Republic of Bulgaria, after the Soviet regime banned many of his works and basically forced him to leave. Markov was an extremely talented writer, a father, a husband, and a much-needed outspoken voice for the Bulgarian people. While his work did finally get the recognition it deserved and has gone on to win numerous awards, the truth is that Markov is mostly known for his death. And honestly, I kind of understand because this case is wild and it started me down an insane rabbit hole about weapons and what people were working on during the Cold War. Truly, what were we doing? But going back to the story, Markov arrived at his office at the BBC and complained that his leg hurt, telling his coworkers about the strange incident with the umbrella. Throughout the day, his leg continued to be sore, and he developed what is described as a small red pimple. As time went on, he started feeling sick, developed a fever, and started throwing up. He skipped that night's broadcast, went home, and got even worse. The next day, he went to the hospital where doctors racked their brains, considering things like venomous tropical snakes, mysterious viruses, and honestly, anything they could think of. They ran tests, took x-rays, and did their best to keep him as comfortable as possible. But within a few days, his body started shutting down, and he eventually passed due to a heart attack. This is where things get really wild, as in his autopsy, the coroner discovered a strange capsule, a small watch bearing that had been injected into his leg. The bearing had 2 strange holes drilled into it that formed an X cavity that would have held about 1/5 of a milligram of something. Clearly some kind of poison, and professionals began to suspect that ricin was to blame for Markov's sudden death due to his symptoms: high white blood cell counts, soreness in injection site, and hemorrhages of the internal organs. Experts still had a lot of questions. That was until a few weeks later when the KGB tried this trick again. This time, though, investigators were able to remove the capsule from the victim's back before any damage was done. And what they discovered was strange. It turns out that in order to be sure the ricin would enter the bloodstream, the holes in the capsule were sealed with a wax that would melt at body temperature, releasing the ricin directly into the bloodstream and killing the victim slowly, in a way that would be impossible to stop and very likely to escape detection. In fact, they weren't even able to confirm it was ricin until they sadly injected a pig with it and studied it very closely. It just so happens this pig exhibited the same exact symptoms of Markov. And the only reason they suspected ricin in the first place was because it was rumored to be of interest to the Soviet Union as they were developing new and inconspicuous weapons. It was later confirmed by a KGB defector that Markov was indeed targeted by the Soviet Union, who was not a fan of his work and was eager to silence him. Over 10 years after his death, Markov's works were eventually allowed back into his home country and are now widely regarded. While there are tons of pop culture references and even a few other cases involving ricin, this is by far the most well known, and I think it gives you a good idea of what the world was up to and thinking about during the Cold War. While not nearly as common as you might believe, ricin poisoning does still occur from time to time. Being said, Castor is an important and iconic plant that can be seen across the globe. Next time you lay eyes on it, I hope you say hello and take a moment to consider all the ways this freak of nature has impacted our lives and culture. That's all I've got for this week, but I'll be back next week to dive into another toxic tale involving Agatha Christie, poisonous pre-workout, and plenty of other twists and turns. See you then. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. If you liked this show, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can follow us on social media at rooted.pod, which is Instagram and TikTok mostly. We're also on YouTube at rooted.podcasts, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, and so much more. Thank you so much for being here and for learning with me. The show wouldn't be possible without your support. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. Rooted, a Plant Podcast, is a Henbane Media LLC production. It's written and produced by me, Ed Grubter Gaddis, with theme music by Eric Clarkson.